Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Millennial's Point of View. Today we're going to be taking a look at 4 reasons on why the PS Vita and Sega Dreamcast are basically the same system. So stay tuned. Alright, so you might be wondering exactly what I mean when I say that the PS Vita and the Sega Dreamcast are the same system. Now, of course, they're not actually the same system, but what I mean more so is the history and the fate of each system. They're very similar in many different ways, and I wanted to point out 4 big reasons why I think they're so similar and how they ended up turning out. Alright, so the first reason that I think that the Sega Dreamcast and PS Vita are so similar is because they're both way ahead of their time. For the Dreamcast, you had the first console experience that overtook the arcade in as far as quality goes, and it was also the first console that came with an Ethernet port. And that might sound like a small thing now, but that was a huge deal back then, and it was nothing really like it out at the time until the PS2 and Xbox and all that stuff followed up with that, but that was like 2 years later. So all that stuff that the Dreamcast did was super ahead of its time, and those are definitely the 2 biggest things for sure. And then for the PS Vita, it was basically console quality gaming on a handheld, which wouldn't even come to be again until 2017 with the Nintendo Switch. I mean, you had the crossplay as well, so that was encouraged to kind of, play your console games on the Vita, and this was 2 years before the PS4 even came out. So it was really cool to see at the time, and a very underutilized feature is the crossplay, and also, like I said, bringing console quality gaming to a handheld really kind of stubbed its growth and made games to make for it a little bit more expensive than maybe a game for 3DS or obviously phones and things like that. So it was much more of a commitment, and after the first year or two the writing was kind of on the wall, and you never really got big games developed for it after the first couple years. But I digress. The Switch didn't copy the Vita, but it definitely took inspiration from it, bringing that console quality HD graphics on the go with you. So I think that's really good innovation as well. The Dreamcast took console gaming to another level, and then the PS Vita took handheld gaming to another level as far as graphics go and performance. Alright, the next similarity that I have for the Dreamcast and PS Vita is that they both had a similar amount of time on the market, at least in North America. For the Dreamcast, it was 1999 to 2001, and then for the PS Vita, it was 2012 to about 2014-15. Now you might be saying to yourself, oh, they still make PS Vita games, but those PS Vita games that they make now are so niche and so few and far between. They're mostly visual novel games, give or take maybe a couple of different ones, but they're so niche and they don't really make games that appeal to a wider audience at all anymore. Even a wider audience for the PS Vita, it's just such a small percentage of the audience that has a Vita are interested in those games, if we're being fair. And just like with the Dreamcast, a lot of those games are coming from Japan. Now, the Dreamcast lived a lot longer in Japan, so they had games being made for it until 2007 over there. And similar thing with the PS Vita is that all of the games for the PS Vita right now are coming out in Japan, are coming from Japan, pretty much. It's just that unlike the Dreamcast, the Vita games that they are getting, we are getting some of them still over here, which is why it's technically not dead. But let me just explain to you why I think that the Vita died a couple of years in, just like the Dreamcast ended up doing. So let me list off the top 10 best-selling PS Vita games just to prove my point here. We got Uncharted Golden Abyss, Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation, Call of Duty Black Ops Declassified, Little Big Planet PS Vita, Persona 4 Golden, Minecraft, Need for Speed Most Wanted, Final Fantasy X and X-2 HD Remake, Killzone Mercenary, and Tearaway. Now, what do all those games have in common? They all came out fairly early in the system's life cycle. So, seeing that and looking at some of the other games that came out for the system, like later on, nothing even comes close to those games. So the most successful years were in the first couple of years. That's not even deniable. Like I said, some of the games that we have are niche, and I'm not saying niche games are bad. There were some good niche games for the Vita too. For example, some notable ones right here are the Metroidvania game Muramasa Rebirth, We Love Katamari, and Trigger Happy Havoc. Now, again, those are pretty early on in the PS Vita's life cycle. Now, I don't claim to be an expert on the system. I don't know all of the good games on the Vita, but I know what generally interests me, and I can look at a trailer of a game and kind of 9 times out of 10 be like, I probably won't like that, or I will definitely enjoy that. So, you know, there isn't really that much right now, or even, again, after the first couple of years for the Vita that came out, that was like, oh, I need to get that game. I think the last new Vita game I bought was Trigger Happy Havoc, so gives you an idea of how many good titles were coming out on the system at the time after the first couple of years. Not that many, that's for sure. And then again, how that relates with the Dreamcast is that it died out in 2001 here in North America, still went a little bit further in Japan until 2007, but after Sonic Adventure 2 came out for it, nothing really super duper notable, even exclusively in Japan, really came out for it. Although they both technically didn't die in the first 2 or 3 years, they pretty much stopped making a high volume of great games for it after those 2 to 3 years, because the writing was on the wall that these systems weren't going to sell that much more no matter how much more money you put into making each of the games. So Sony and Sega, decided to kind of pull the plug on each of their systems at the time. Alright, and then the third thing that I think that they're very similar in is sales numbers and small but dedicated fan base. So the Dreamcast sold 9.13 million units worldwide, and then the PS Vita sold about 10 to 15. That number is not solidified yet because it is a little bit still on the newer side, so they don't have a solid set number, but it's probably going to end up around 13, 14 million. So, in the grand scheme of things, they're not too far off from each other as far as sales goes, especially for consoles. That leap isn't very high. And then what I mean by small and dedicated fan base is that, sure, there weren't a ton of people that played and got extensively into the library of the PS Vita or the Sega Dreamcast, but you can see online, if you look around even just a little bit, the people that really got into it. So they are, singing the praises from any mountain, anyone that will listen. They're singing the praises of each of the systems. Both systems have such a passionate fan base in their own kind of way. I might not agree with everything that people might have to say about both of the systems, but I do enjoy some games on each system, so I can see where they're coming from. I think it's such a great thing to be into a system so much, and even though it's a little niche, you're like kind of defending it, but also kind of like not being a jerk about it and just being like, oh hey, you like games, maybe I can open this door to this new platform here that has a bunch of great games that other systems don't have. And a lot of the best niche, good Vita games and Dreamcast games are only on those systems, and you're never getting a port to another system because, again, they're so niche. That is the key word with the Vita and the Dreamcast, is that they have so many niche classics on each system. That's why I think these fan bases are so passionate. It's because I know whenever I find a game that I really like and none of my friends are really interested in playing or haven't really heard of, I'm just like, yo, guys, you gotta play this. This is so good. And I try and tell them like why they should play this. And 9 times out of 10 they don't end up playing it. But that one time that they do and they say, man, that game was great. I'm so glad you told me about it. That just makes you feel like, yeah, I'm really glad he likes it too. Because it doesn't only justify and make me feel good in the fact that I like it, but it also is like I could share those experiences that not a lot of people get to have with my friends and other people online in this case. Alright guys, so the last reason that I have for both of these systems being very similar is that they're both the last of their kind for each of the companies. So for the Dreamcast, obviously it was Sega's last home console. It's when they bowed out of the console race and Microsoft kind of took their spot. And it was a sad day for gaming. Sega's been there since the Master System. It was definitely rough on some big fans of Sega. But, the console itself being gone didn't impact Sega that much, but I think the way they made games changed after the Dreamcast died is what affected them so much. Because for a while there, they just focused on a couple of different franchises, and they're still kind of doing that, but they're getting better. They are focusing on more and more different franchises as time goes on, but for like a decade or two there, they were just focusing on like Sonic and maybe 2, 3, at maximum 4 other franchises that they have at a time, and they have like 50 to 60 notable franchises that they haven't done anything with in a long time. and they're still not really doing a ton with all the stuff that they have. But like I said, it is getting better. But I think that's the #1 thing that changed with Sega as far as leaving the console race, is that they were less willing to take a risk with their games. Maybe it's because they got burned on the console. Maybe it's just because they're like, well, we want to do mass appeal, so because we're going third party now, so we want to be able to sell all systems and get as many people as we can. And you know, some of these games, obviously, that they don't do anymore are very much geared towards Sega fans, which if you don't have a dedicated console, that's kind of a hard thing to sell on other consoles. But yeah, so that makes sense, but again, it was kind of sad to see Sega go out of the console race. And then for Sony and the PS Vita, it was the last handheld that Sony ever made, and they actually recently announced that they're not making another handheld to compete with Nintendo and the Nintendo Switch. And I think that's a lot bigger of a deal than the Dreamcast, in my personal opinion, because, you know, Microsoft kind of took Sega's place, and not even for like a year did we not have 3 big console manufacturers, with Microsoft stepping in. But without Sony, you know, they didn't do great with the Vita, but the PSP was some really stiff competition for the original DS. It sold very well. It's one of the best selling systems out there. I think it's like 70 or 80 million units, so a lot more than the Vita did. But without Sony, you know, you don't have that competition in the handheld market. You know, smartphones are really their own thing. It's not really competing with the Nintendo Switch in any way, shape, or form. It's a totally different market. So, you know, obviously, kind of, Nintendo is technically in the handheld and home console race. They want to do well and kind of compete with Sony and Microsoft, but they're kind of off in their own little corner doing their own thing. And Nintendo handhelds like always sell well, so they have that market completely cornered with the Switch Lite and just the regular Switch. So without having that competition there, it doesn't push them as hard as they could be pushed. And I think that's a bigger detriment to the gaming industry than, you know, losing a third console manufacturer for like 6 months, if that. So I think it's a much bigger deal for that reason, but I think both of them were a pretty big deal, especially at the time. And, you know, it's really sad to see them both go and not do any more consoles or handhelds at all. And I do think they could have changed things to make things more profitable, but obviously hindsight is 2020, and what can you do now? Just learn from your mistakes. But you know, they're not making anything new anytime soon, if ever, so they can just kind of take what they learned from it and put it into their games, or maybe some other aspects of their company kind of thing. But yeah, you know, again, hard to see them go, but I think it makes sense with why they did end up bowing out of the console and handheld race. Alright, so yeah, those were my 4 reasons I think the PS Vita and Sega Dreamcast are basically the same system. Now just go over them real quick once more. They're both way ahead of their time. They both have similar time on the market. They both have similar sales market and a small but dedicated fan base. And finally, they're both the last of their kind from the console and handheld manufacturing aspect for both companies. But yeah, you know, if I forgot anything, there are some other similarities with the Dreamcast and PS Vita, please let me down below. You know, I'd love to get the conversation going. And you know, if you totally disagree with me, tell me why you disagree with me. Again, love to get the conversation going, see what people had to say about these kind of topics. I just thought this was a little fun one. I had an idea for it and I said, you know what, let's go ahead and do it. So hopefully you guys like it. You know, if you guys do like this, then please consider subscribing, liking, and sharing to help the channel grow. If you're not quite sure with the channel yet, you know, I do have other videos you can check out. And you know, if you do like those, then maybe consider sticking around, because I'm gonna definitely plan on doing more content in the future. And if you guys like this format, please let me know, because this stuff is like a lot easier and less editing to make than some of the other stuff. But you know, if you guys don't like it, I'll change it up. So please let me know down below. But anyways, guys, thank you for watching to this point if you got this far, and I'll see you guys next time. Hey guys, welcome to another episode.